comment item on the agenda or an item that's not on the agenda, please see Ellen over at that table and fill out a card to speak. So having gotten through that formality, I would like to call our meeting to order and start with a roll call. And the best way to do that is just sort of go around and have everyone sort of introduce themselves and just a quick couple of sentences about yourself so we can have an opportunity to get to know everyone. And we'll actually use that as our in the minutes as who attended tonight. So if we'll start with Susan, because you're at the start over there. And the last thing I just wanted to say is a former trustee, Milrick, is on his way. He apologizes he's late, but he's going to be here. So Susan, if you don't mind starting this off on introductions,
Sure, absolutely. I'm Susan Warnick. I am a former Novato council member as well as a former Novato mayor. I am a longtime resident, over 30 years in San Marin, and just to note that land use issues with Novato Unified School District properties was how I got started on my journey in local government 15 years ago. So it's fun to come full circle. Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Hello, my name is Thomas Weldon. My name is Thomas Weldon. I'm a former planning commissioner with Swernick and a current NUSD trustee member at Novato Charter School, where my two daughters, Simone and Maven, go. And I've been a Novato resident for a little over 12 years. Thanks.
Welcome.
Jeff Schenkel, a parent of two elementary school kids, youth pastor in Marin County with many youth scattered all around the county and families, and very excited to be here to work with people who know more and are far more talented than I am. So thank you for joining.
Yes, I'm Don Nicodemus. I'm a former employee of the district. I worked in the information technology department for about 10 years. I'm also president of the California School Employees Association, Local 312 here at Novato.
Can you hear me? Liz Nelson, and I teach at Sinaloa Middle School. I'm on my 30th year teaching, and I am also the co-president of our teachers union.
I am Dean Moser. I'm a 55-year resident of Novato, and I am in primarily the mobile home park business, but I also was chairman of the oversight committee for the first $100 million bond that the school district put out, and I'm happy to serve again.
Appreciate your service.
I'm David Lacey. I'm a retired elementary school teacher and principal from Southern California. We've lived in Novato for 10 years now. I have a grandson at San Marin and a granddaughter at Sinaloa.
I'm Dale Klein. I'm a retired former insurance company executive, past president and current advisory board member of School Fuel, longtime advocate for the public schools in Novato, and then currently the president of the Novato Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, I'm Juliette Jones. I have been an employee of NUSD for 20 years, 17 as a teacher, 3 as an administrator, currently assistant principal at San Jose Middle School. I've lived in Novato for 27 years. I've owned a house in Novato for 25 years. I am a former small business owner from Novato, and my 2 kids went through schools here, one graduating from San Marin and one graduating from Novato High.
Hi everyone, Heather Bettini. I'm from Marin County and I've lived in Novato for 7 years. I have 3 young children, one of whom is a first grader at Hamilton, and I'm the Assistant Vice President of Programs at Community Action Marin with Chandra Alexander, one of our newer Board of Trustees. Great to be with you all.
Now we're going to ask our alternates to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Matt Elkins. I live in Belmar and Keys. I serve on the emergency response team there. I have a son who graduated from Novato High School, also went to San Jose Middle School for a year, and he's moved on, just graduated from college. And I have a little bit of experience, especially during the Measure G campaign here, standing at that mic and helping to steer funds in certain directions. And I'm really happy to be here.
Great, thanks.
Hi, I'm Tina McMillan. I'm a 43-year Novato resident. Both my boys, who are adults now, graduated from Novato schools, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to serve on multiple committees and commissions related to the school district and the city. Having been on the previous 7-Eleven commission, I thought it would be helpful to participate in this process, and so just look forward to being on board as an alternate.
Appreciate your experience.
Good evening. I'm Rick Van Adelsberg. I'm a 24-year resident here in Novato and longtime educator, a teacher, and a principal, and currently semi-retired, supporting the residency program here in Novato. It's a teacher pipeline, and I'm happy to be able to help out here.
Great, yeah. Residency program is important. It's similar to what I do along the lines of attracting and training staff for our district. The residency program helps develop teachers for our district as well. So really appreciate everyone. Thank you very much for going through that. I know sometimes it can be a little bit awkward, but I just figured as formal as we're going to be, we'll have a little informal moments and work together going forward. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our superintendent, Tracy Smith, who has a welcoming message for you.
All right. So if you have about half hour, that's how usually much I talk, or about like 1 minute, which is simply to just absolutely, I feel the support of all of you in the room as your experience is coming through, your connection to the district, to Novato, all the different ways people like to say Novato. I love it. And let's see, I'm a 9-year resident now in Novato, and been in many places in Marin, and this is my favorite. And so, welcome. We have a lot of work to do, but very, very important work and essential work to follow all the legal guidelines correctly, to do right by how we, as a school district, manage our properties. And so we appreciate your part in this portion of the journey that will be hopefully the beginning of, the middle of the road. Where are we, Derek? We're like somewhere, yeah, and hopefully creating workforce housing for our community. So thank you all very much. Can I?
Yeah, I blew it. I forgot to give my boss an opportunity to introduce himself, so hopefully I'll be forgiven. But Josh, please.
I think you'll be fine. My name is Joshua Braff. I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and I think I can only just parrot the exact same thing that was said by my boss, Dr. Tracy Smith, saying thank you very, very much for participating in this. I think a goal of this administration has been very much to be members of the community, to be transparent, to be participatory in everything that happens in Novato in ways that we can, in ways that are appropriate. And this is a way that we can bring in everyone from the community to be participatory and transparent with us. Let us know what we can and should be doing with, in this case here, our properties, but also, through our Budget Advisory Committee, ICOC, Parcel Tax Committee, all the different ways that we interact with our community for oversight. It is so absolutely appreciated, and so thank you very much for being here.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Traber. I'm a lawyer with Fagan, Friedman, and Fullfrost, and it's great to be here with you tonight. I'm going to keep it brief. I'm just here to give a presentation and kind of give us some background about what the committee is and some of the basic rules that we're going to abide while we go through this process. And I'll have more to say in a moment, but turn it over to Derek here.
So again, just to follow along official procedures, this is the point on our agenda where we're going to ask for public comment. And there's nothing prohibits members from making public comment, but so if anybody has any, this would be the time to say so. But seeing none, and before I take public comment, thank you, Ellen. We are going to, I'm just going to ask for consensus on approval of tonight's agenda. if I could have a show of hands for now, and we'll get a little more formal on our actions in the future. All right, terrific. So we have an approved agenda. So you do need to. Oh, gosh. All right, so I'm blowing it on my parliamentary procedure.
I'll make it.
All right, so that's first by Ross Millrick and seconded by Don Nicodemus. All right, and thank you for keeping me on point. I'm just so excited to be here. This is the kind of thing I enjoy doing, believe it or not. Okay, so then at this point, I've asked for public comment. They're seeing none. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce James Traber with F3, who's been instrumental in supporting our efforts here on our property analysis since the beginning. So, Jim, take it away.
Thanks, Derek. Let's see how I advance slides here. There we go. All right. So good evening. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm Jim Traber. I'm a partner with Fagan, Friedman, and Full Frost. For the last 17 years, I've been helping schools basically handle the business side of their operations. So anything to do with land, contracts, things that are not, students and employees is what I usually help with, technology, and of course, workforce housing. Done a lot of workforce housing over the years and really excited about working with this particular district because I think it's something that can happen here. A lot of districts have great plans of doing this and they run into obstacles that they cannot surmount. But in this case, I feel like we've got all of the pieces of the puzzle to make it go forward. It's a matter of how we do it and making sure that we follow through. So with that, I'm going to dive in a little bit. So the purpose of meeting with you all tonight and why I'm standing up here is to try to help give you an idea of what this committee is that you're on and give you a sense of what to expect in the future and some kind of parameters about the committee so that you have a solid understanding of what it is and what it is not as we move forward. Additionally, I'm going to briefly talk about the Brown Act, which is why we're all sitting here doing this in this way this evening. This meeting is subject to the Brown Act. And the reason that I want to talk with you about that is we're all subject to it sitting here, and we don't want to have anybody inadvertently violate the Brown Act. So we give you some basic guidelines about how to go and conduct your meetings without a violation. I'm also going to talk a little bit about where we fit as a committee here within the overall process of the sale of school property, because there's a larger process that we go through. This committee is one portion of that, and I think it's going to be helpful to the committee to understand where you fit overall. I want to talk a little bit about the intent of the committee, why the legislature had us do this in the first place so long ago. We do this on every school property that is leased or sold. We'll talk a little bit about what the underpinnings of that idea was. So I want to go into first, what is a surplus property committee and really what's the intent? Why are we here? Years ago, the legislature enacted law that said, before you sell or lease a surplus property as a school district, you have to consult with the committee. And that's what we are all doing here tonight. So the law requires that the school board appoint a committee of at least 7, but not more than 11 members that fulfill certain, requirements and fill certain categories. And the district staff did an amazing job of making sure that we did hit all of those categories, candidly. Most of the time, the most common question I get that kind of recurs about 7-11 committees is, what do we do if we don't have enough people to fill the committee? So I'm encouraged and I think it's great that we have so many folks here willing to serve. The idea behind the committee is to provide the school board with a window into what the community thinks about the particular property and
whether it is surplus property and maybe what should be done with it in the future in terms of selling or leasing. The idea behind it is if we didn't have this committee, theoretically the board could be in a position where they put a property out for sale and don't have a lot of, it could be done on 72 hours notice at a regular school board meeting, and there isn't a community involvement process. So in order to avoid that situation, this process has been put in place, which gives everybody in the community basically an opportunity to serve and also to talk with you all on the committee itself. I want to say something up front. The reason that it's called, some people will call it a 7-Eleven committee, and I'm sure I'll trip and call it a 7-Eleven committee tonight, but it's because it's supposed to have at least 7, not more than 11 members. You may hear, and in some cases this happens, schools have the option, if they're going to close a school, to appoint a similar committee. I'll be very clear that is not what this is. We're just here talking about surplus properties. And that's the mandatory one. The school closures is permissive. In this case, it's mandatory that we have the committee here, and that's what we're doing here. Ultimately, the decision about what happens with a specific property, it still rests with the school board. They still own the property, and they get to decide what to do with it. The purpose of the committee here is to, again, provide a window for the board's consideration to look at what is the community's input about what happens with a specific property. So to talk a little bit about the composition of the committee, and I think, you can see further to the intent that I've been talking about, you can see from the composition, they want to make it representative of the community itself. They've gone beyond things that you might think of and said, let's look at folks that are in the same ethnic, socioeconomic age group type folks that are going to represent this community. And so they want folks that are business owners, store owners, they want teachers, administrators, parents, people, of course, that have some expertise in land transactions, always helpful to have on these committees. But the overarching theme of this is to get a group of community members together to talk about these properties and, again, provide some data and input for the board. This committee is what we call a board committee. There's different kinds of committees. The reason we call it a board committee is that it is created by an action of the school board. What that means for us here, when a school board creates a subcommittee like this, it triggers the Brown Act and all of its requirements, which we'll talk about later on. The school board is required to appoint this committee, which we did in December on the 3rd. We did it by resolution, and we have to do that for 2 reasons. One is to comply with the provisions of the Ed Code. The second is to comply with provisions of the Government Code, which were put in place back in 2021. This committee allows us to determine that this property falls into what is called exempt surplus property, which just allows us to do a transaction essentially as we normally would, as a normal property owner would. Things that are not school properties have to go through a different process now. They get auctioned on a state clearinghouse website. We don't typically do that with school properties. Again, the purpose of the committee is advisory, and we're looking at school buildings. That's the term there, but that's actually defined to include land. That's why we're sitting here talking about land potentially that doesn't have any buildings on it. This committee will focus more or less on these properties and what to do with it. There's no way around talking to some extent about what the future uses of the property will be, and I'm sure that that'll come up. Ultimately, though, this is going to be, I think, primarily a discussion about some of the items that we'll mention in a minute, but we're going to look at things like enrollment data. Do we need these properties in the future for school use? That's going to be one of the primary questions that we're going to need to answer on this committee. To skip ahead to the very end of all of this, what happens at the end is that the committee approves a report. And the report says these are the properties that we've studied. We think that they're surplus to the school district's needs. And you can put in your reports, your report. You can put in there what you want to report back to the school board about these properties and what you may have found. Not at this meeting, but at a subsequent meeting, we're going to come back to you and give you data about the properties that we're studying and some demographic data and enrollment data that will show kind of enrollment trends that have happened in the school district recently, so you have that information. Typically what happens with respect to the report is that district staff will help create a draft of the report. You'll all get the draft of the report and talk about it, and you can obviously make changes to it as you see fit. Typically, district staff will act as kind of the scribe to complete the report per your wishes, and that way nobody on the committee necessarily has to take the laboring oar of drafting that report. The reports vary in length. I've seen everything from 3 or 4 pages to 150 pages. The ones that are longer are typically much more involved transactions and complicated pieces of property. The ones that I see that are really long, you're talking about studying existing school sites that are closing, and those sites are going to be surplused, and there's a lot of homework and data that has to go into those decisions. I would say I think the properties that we're going to talk about here are probably in the shorter category. So further on about what this committee does, we're going to look at information so that you can make a determination about whether these properties are surplus. To do that, we're going to look at things like enrollment data, and you can look at enrollment trends in the district, essentially satisfying yourself as to whether or not these properties are needed for school use in the future. There's going to be a public hearing, at least one. We're required by statute to do that. You'll see that. It's not going to have a significant impact on the way that you do business other than parliamentary procedure. We have a comment section, a regular open comment section at all of our meetings, so the community can always comment. This is simply a statutory compliance issue where we'll say we're opening a public hearing and folks can come and talk, close the public hearing, and then we'll go on to whatever the business is of that night. So in your report that you deliver to the school board, you're going to provide recommendations for the disposition of the property, whether or not you think it should be sold, leased, used, however you think it should go. Again, at the end, you deliver a report making that recommendation based on the information that you all share, that you receive from staff, and any community input that you receive in the middle of this process. So the role of the committee is to provide some valued input to the school board about these properties that we're going to be talking about. I think the last thing that any school board wants to do is approve an action to lease or sell property only to find out that the community is totally against that idea. So that's, again, kind of the purpose of what we're doing here, to think hard about the properties. And from what I know of these sites, I don't know if they're terribly controversial, but we do want to do a homework on them and kind of make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's. Again, the decision ultimately about it, what happens with the property, is going to rest with the school board, but this committee is going to provide advice and a report to them about what we think should be done with that property. I will say, the matters that this committee is really concerned with are limited to these surplus properties. There's inevitably going to be some bleed over into other topics. That's the way that these things happen. But that being said, to the extent we can remain focused on these surplus properties, I think gets us a shorter distance between 2 points, and ultimately the goal is to render that report to the school board in a way that they can understand with as little delay as possible, so that they can make determinations about what they want to do. I will say, I know there is a separate committee that exists with a more broad purpose to study workforce housing. Those agendas are published, and welcome to join those meetings as well. the conversations there, I think, will dovetail with what we're doing here in some respects, but ultimately the purposes of the committees are not necessarily one-to-one. Okay, so this is the part where I have to talk about the Ralph Brown Act. This is the open meeting law that applies to local governments. It applies to all special districts, cities, counties, school districts, and their subcommittees, which is what we are here. The reason that this law exists is to make sure that the public's business is done in public. I always tell folks the way to think about the Brown Act, if you can, is to try to think of it as though you were a bad person for a moment. What would you do if you were a bad person and you wanted to get on a board and you wanted to do deals that you didn't want any people to know about? That's what this law is intended to protect the public against. 99 times out of 100, there isn't going to be a Brown Act issue, and we do this training to give you some basically information to let you know that it's there so that nothing inadvertent comes about. We're going to talk tonight about what the agenda requirements are under the Brown Act. The Brown Act basically wants the public to know what's going on. So one of the things that we have to do is publish an agenda, talking and telling the public, hey, this is what's coming up in 72 hours. We publish the agenda 3 days before we meet for a regular meeting, 24 hours before we meet for a special meeting. For this committee, I predict that all of your meetings will just be 72-hour notices. I don't foresee having to do a meeting on 24 hours notice. That agenda has to contain a reasonable description of the business that you're going to be doing at your meeting. Again, the reason here is so that nobody's surprised. If I were a bad person, I wanted to get a contract through, I didn't want anybody to know about it, I might throw it on that agenda right at the last minute. We can't, we're not going to do that. That isn't how it works. One of the other purposes for the Brown Act is to allow for public comments. Before all of our meetings, we allow for public comments, particularly on things that are on the agenda. For regular meetings, we allow public comments for things that are not on the agenda at the beginning. I don't anticipate this being a significant issue with this committee. It's really more of an issue for school boards and larger entities. Again, the goal of the Brown Act is to provide some transparency and to make sure that there aren't backroom deals being done basically without the public knowing about it. In this case, you might take an action, maybe two. Probably the main action that you will take in this case is approval of that 7-11 committee report. Prior to that, there will be a lot of discussion items. Candidly, I don't think tonight there will be some action items for you to approve a chair and a vice chair, but I don't foresee a lot of other action items happening. The reason that I'm mentioning that is just, that's the way your agenda is going to look. They're mostly going to show up as discussion items. You're going to continue the discussion about these properties that you're studying. The final thing that I'll mention on this slide is it's critical to understand for the purposes of the Brown Act what a meeting is. Candidly, when I came to doing this a very long time ago, it was surprising to me how critical of a piece of information that was. It didn't make sense. It obviously does now, but a meeting is basically any time that a majority of you are going to be talking about the business of your committee. Or if you're sitting on the school board, it'd be the business of the school board. If you're sitting on a city council, it'd be the business of the city. You can have meetings on accident, and I think this is one of the primary reasons that we want to talk about this. It's a majority of your membership, so if there's 11 of you, it'd be 6. If you have 6 of you that assemble or talk about the business of the committee at the same time, that'll be a meeting. And the problem with that is that if you haven't posted an agenda for your meeting, you can't really have that meeting. So the trick is if 6 of you wind up in the same place at the same time, you don't want to talk about the purview of your duties here and the things that would come before the committee. Now, if 5 of you want to talk about what's going on, that's not a violation of the Brown Act. I would say if you're doing that on a consistent basis, maybe that's not a good look. But It's just from a legal standpoint, as an attorney, that's the hard line. It's a majority of the body. If 6 or 7 or all 11 of you assemble in the same place and you want to talk about the Buffalo Bills, who I'm a huge fan of, that's perfectly fine, because it's not about the business of the committee. So that's really the line. It's a majority of you talking about the subject matter that your committee is going to be considering. Other ways that this can happen, and this goes back to what I was mentioning before, if you think about an item that's really controversial, and I'm going to go back in time and pretend for a moment that we're talking about introducing computers into the classroom, and maybe at one time that was pretty controversial and people didn't really know what they were going to do with it. Big contract coming before the board, and we've got to approve it. And maybe, I'm sure this didn't happen, but maybe there were some in favor, maybe there were some opposed, maybe there were some that said, I really don't like the contractor, I really don't like the amount involved, whatever, but there was a majority of the board that wanted to push it through. And that's where you really get into the kind of thick of the Brown Act, is when you have a split board. And when everything's unanimous, it's not as critical. It's when you have a split. And when you have maybe 5 people, 4 people, and they want to know, gosh, how is this other guy going to vote? Do we have a majority? And they're trying to figure that out before they go out in public at a meeting to try to approve a contract or approve having computers in the classroom, something that's controversial. Where folks can get into trouble with the Brown Act is there's basically 2 different scenarios. One is what we call spoken hub, where one person goes to a majority, or in this case, one person would go to 5 more and say, how are you going to vote? How are you going to vote? They're trying to develop a collective concurrence about the vote that is about to happen. That's illegal. It shouldn't happen. I will say intentional violations of the Brown Act can be prosecuted. It's not a very common prosecution, but it does happen. It is a misdemeanor, and certainly, don't want to find ourselves in that situation. The other way that it can happen is where there's a chain communication. One person tells another person, who tells another person, and it goes down that line, relaying that information about where they're going to vote on an item, and they develop a majority doing it that way. Again, that's a violation, and again, I don't foresee that happening here. In the age that we live in now, there's other ways that this can happen, like email or text messages, and so we always caution folks that an email communication is basically the same as an in-person communication. For purposes of the Brown Act, we can't develop a collective concurrence that way. Same for text. Another way that it happens now is through social media, and there are specific rules involved with social media, where you might have folks that post something that leads to a concurrence, and other folks are liking or commenting on that if you're developing a collective concurrence. Those rules are complicated, and I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of explaining all of them, but I would just suggest if you have an item that's being posted on social media that's within the purview of the committee, and you're going to comment on it, you don't want to be doing that and developing a concurrence amongst yourselves. Again, I don't think that's going to happen here, but you should know that the law exists. So this slide just really, again, focuses on these serial meetings. It's typically where you have a couple of folks and they're trying to find out how that majority person is going to vote. When we post the agenda, there's a legal reason why we post these agendas like what you saw tonight. It's because we want to give the public notice of what we're doing and what we're talking about. And they can come and comment on it if they would like. Our notices are going to be posted 72 hours in advance. They're going to state when and where we're going to meet. And we're going to talk about what exactly we're going to be talking about at the meeting. On request, if someone wants, they can get those agendas in an alternative format. For special meetings, again, it's 24 hours in advance. I don't see that happening here. The critical one is number 4. We can't discuss or take action on items that are not on the agenda. This can come up, may not come up here, it may come up here. To the extent we open a meeting and we offer public comment on items that are not on the agenda, the board or the committee here shouldn't respond to those items because they're not on your agenda. All that we can really say is thank you for that. We will take it back and consider putting it on a future agenda. For example, if you think about it, you could be talking about subject matter A. A guy comes in talking about B. No one from the public knew you were going to be talking about B. And if you were allowed to do that, it would be a real easy way to kind of have meetings happen on the fly where the public didn't really know what was going on at the meeting. So that's why we don't do that. The public is also going to have an opportunity to speak on any matter that's on your agenda in either open or closed session. For us, we're only going to be concerned about open sessions. So public records, all of the documents that are on an agenda, attached to an agenda, are going to be public records. They're going to be discoverable by members of the public that are asking about it. In our case, I'm going to venture that there is a very low probability that documents are going to be distributed to you between 72 hours and the meeting. But if that were the case, we would have to make them available to everybody at the time that we gave them to you. Just switching gears briefly off the Brown Act here, talking a little bit about the focus of our analysis in the 2 sites that were in the board's resolution when it established the committee. There's the San Andreas site and the Meadow Annex site. Those are going to be the things that we're going to have more substantive conversations about in the future and bring information to you about those sites, their history, and potential uses. Other things that may come up in the course of our discussions that you should know about. There are different ways to do surplus property deals. There's sales, there's leases, license agreements, and exchanges. We'll talk more about these later. Sale and lease is probably immediately apparent to all of us. An exchange can happen where someone else has a piece of property and they're going to flip it with you. Basically take your property and you get theirs. There's oftentimes when that happens some sort of additional stuff that happens as part of that exchange, tenant improvements, cash, whatever it may be. So in any event, those are the main things that we're going to run into. I also wanted to tell you, in order for a school district to sell property and where you fit into this process, after the 7-Eleven is done and it gives the report to the school board then has to make some decisions about what to do with it. There's a statutory process when they go to get a lease or to sell the property. It's like an auction. We basically offer it to other public entities first, assuming they don't want it. Then there's like a bid where these entities, you post it just like almost like you would a construction bid. And then you get bids in from potential buyers. And then at the meeting, and I've actually done this before in one district, almost nobody does this. There's an auction where someone stands up there and says, does anybody else want to take this property? Does anybody else want to take this property? And as long as they are, I believe the percentage is 3%, as long as the bids keep going up by 3%, you can keep holding that auction until someone actually gets that property. That's the process that's set forth in the statute. That process is difficult. And the reason in part that it's difficult is you're not acting like a normal property seller. And a lot of times going through that process isn't going to give you the best bang for your buck on selling that property. Because if you're a buyer, you're the guy in the audience with the money that wants to buy that property, your due diligence on that property is pretty minimal. It's like doing it at an auction, where you don't know everything you would like to know about what you're buying. So most school districts, in my experience, they go get a waiver, and that's the first piece that's on this slide. We are authorized to get a waiver from the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education will basically say, You don't have to follow this statutory auction process if you do a request for proposals process. Instead, they'll attach conditions to that. And as part of that process, they'll say, you have to disclose who the person is, obviously, that you're selling it to, why you chose them in a public meeting, which of course we were going to do anyway. When we do the waiver, we have to consult with a committee. Typically, the state asks me, do you have a 7-Eleven committee? Did you consult with them? If we have a 7-Eleven committee, I always like to consult with the 7-Eleven simply because you guys know the properties and you know what we're talking about. All the state is looking for is the committee okay with us submitting a waiver? I've never had it not happen. The reason that I bring all of this up now is because the waivers only last a year. So it's unlikely that we're going to do a waiver in the next couple of weeks here simply because I don't know that we're going to be able to sell a property within a year. All of that to say, we may call you back at some point in the future simply to talk about the waiver and more specifics about what we're planning to do with the property. And that's more of a long-term issue that I just wanted to give you a heads up about. A year from now, you might say, oh yeah, I remember you said that. And that's it from me. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them as best I can. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I know the school board is looking for workforce housing, and there were like 7 properties that are properties that the school board owns. And apparently these are 2 that they have selected that we're going to review and none of the others, right?
That's correct. And I think the purpose of reviewing these properties, if I may be so bold to let Derek talk about it.
Basically, our executive team got together, discussed some priorities, and we looked at as many properties as we could that had potential feasibility done, and then we sort of narrowed that down to what we would do first, second, third, and fourth. And our first stage is to basically the 2 properties that don't have schools on them now or aren't currently being used by the school district. There are other issues. You might be aware of the former Hamilton Air Force Base that has some other issues, title issues and soil issues that would complicate this particular process. And then sites that were suggested in the feasibility study from there are partially used by the school district. And so we're basically approaching it, easy to hardest.
All right, any other questions? Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's connected to the Brown Act, but I know when the city of Novato has people participate in committees like this, in order to avoid perceived conflict of interest, we have to file documents with the FPPC, particularly financial documents. And Novato in the past has tended to be a hotbed on issues like that. And the reason being, if anyone is located within proximity that could be perceived as having some kind of a gain as a result of being on the committee, it's good to have that all out there. So I don't see anything like that in these notes. I'm wondering if that's part of what the school district does as well.
So we typically don't do that for a 7-Eleven committee because there isn't really anything financial going on as far as what they're approving. Yeah.
Any other? What role does changing entitlements on a property come into play? Is that before the property is declared surplus? And would we be involved in that?
So, yeah, great question. So where we're at right now is the school district has to get through this process with respect to the 7-Eleven in order to be able to know, okay, we're going to sell these properties, we're going to lease these, whatever it is that we're going to do with these properties. The entitlement process will probably happen either toward the end of what we're doing here or completely after we're done here. Yeah.
So the purpose of this committee is to give the school board information so they can decide these are surplus properties? Is that, at this point, they're not surplus properties. They're not surplus until we provide the report and they then make a decision. Is that a fair statement? So
This
the
is correct.
properties that we're not considering won't become surplus through this process, just these two for now.
This is correct.
So, okay, so.
All true.
And then they can choose to make them surplus or not based on our report, but it's their choice, and then something happens after that. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, all true. All right, anything else? Thanks for having me. It's great to see you all.
All right, wasn't that fun? So, we're moving along. We have some official business. Tina, I'm not a lawyer, but I heard that one of the reasons we don't file 700 forms, which are kind of, is because it's not a permanent committee, an ongoing regular meeting committee. But I'll ask Jim maybe later if we can find out for sure. But as far as we know right now, that's not necessary. Okay. So our next official action here is to choose a chairperson who's basically going to facilitate the discussions and the conversations at our next couple of meetings, and as well as a vice chairperson. So I would look to the committee for volunteers or nominations.
I'd like to nominate Ross Miller to chair the committee.
All right. Do we have a second for that, or Dale?
I'll second.
Okay. So then we're going to go ahead and ask. I'll just go ahead and ask you to vote. We have a first by Don and a second by Susan to select Ross Miller as our chairperson. And all those in favor, and we don't need to record a voice vote for that type of thing, do we? We do?
I will accept the nomination, but I didn't know that I was going to be nominated, so.
Actually, that's a good thing. We should.
But I will, I'm not.
I have a suggestion, because we have a vice chair, and usually it's a co-chair kind of a job,
Yeah.
and just sort of work together. So once we identify, and obviously, yeah, you've been nominated, but you have to accept the nomination if you if you feel like it's something that you don't want to do.
I promise to continue to serve my community, so the answer is yes, I will serve if not, but I was surprised. Thank you very much. But I didn't. Yeah, okay,
So I will try to oversimplify things. We have to do a recorded voice vote on this, or is it just, we can do show of hands? Okay. So in an effort to share the responsibility, we need another chairperson. So would anyone like to nominate somebody, or?
Yeah, well, actually, because we should have discussion before we actually go to vote.
Yeah, I'm not calling for a vote. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the committee if they'd be interested. We can do one vote on a single ticket.
Gotcha.
And we can sort of put up the two chair people at the same time. We'll designate Ross as the chair and the second person as the vice chair, and then we don't have to vote twice.
Good.
Well, if that's okay with you guys. If it turns out to be an issue, then we'll go back.
I would nominate Susan, because I think she probably knows how to run a meeting.
Okay, so I want to make sure I ask if you're interested.
Well, since this is only a 4-meeting commitment and not a 5-year commitment, like I just got off, I would accept.
Okay, fine. All right, so I need a second to that. So we have Dean has nominated Susan Warnick, and Dale has seconded.
Nope.
So we have Ross.
Ross seconded.
Ross seconded. Did he? Okay, all right.
And I have a nomination.
And you have
well, there's one person on this committee that I think has qualifications that none of the rest of us do, and that is that they still have children in the school district. And while we're talking about surplus properties, at the end of the day, it's about the kids. And so for that reason, I nominate Jeff Schenkel.
Okay, then I'm going to amend the motion that we're going to have to basically see if there's a are you interested in serving as a chairperson?
I don't want to start a fight, but sure. I mean,
Okay.
Whoever.
No, this is fun.
This
All right, so
right.
is there
It's
anyone
better to have
interested
more
in-
options than none.
Will anyone second Jeff's nomination? I have a first from Dale, a second from. Okay, very good. Then the nomination fails, so I'm going to go back to our combined ticket of Ross and Susan, and ask for a show of hands. If that what I'm getting a. I was going to try to vote once, but if what I will go ahead and withdraw that idea and basically just say that we have to do them one at a time. But so did you get who seconded the nomination of Ross for chairperson? Okay. Okay. That sounded right to me. Does that sound right to everybody? Can we vote on that combined ticket motion now that we've identified the? No, I can't. Okay, so all those in favor of Ross as chairperson? Very good, thank you. And all those in favor of Susan as our vice chair? All right. Thanks, everyone, for participating, but basically that's it. We have completed our official act for tonight, and we're ready to adjourn. And our next meeting will be held on February 5th, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Again, thanks a lot for coming and serving our community.